Thank you to my colleague from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson, for continuing to lead these in order to get this important message out on what's facing Americans, not because of a naturally caused crisis, but a man-made one, a government-made one. We're doing it to ourselves. So instead of addressing the economic crisis that's plaguing Americans, the Democrats are prioritizing liberal initiatives and increasing federal spending, with some accounts receiving double-digit and even triple-digit percentage increases, typically through regulatory agencies that are going to make our jobs harder to do. Okay? We have issues. You see, this is just a small example right here of some of the prices of things that are going up. It's not because we've had hurricanes or things like that that have wiped out crops. No, we've had a lot of droughts. But in my home state of California, some of that drought and some of the shortages of water indeed are because of government action. The priorities that we see for the spending include giving 20% more money to the EPA. Well, I've had the EPA work in conjunction with the Army Corps of Engineers to stop people from farming fields in my district because they think it might have an effect on the Clean Water Act or something like that. These are fields that have already been farmed in the past, but they've been fallowed for a period of time. They want to put them back into production. Oh, no, you need a permit. They didn't think they needed a permit. They didn't know they needed a permit, so they get fined big time. So as Americans face this runaway inflation caused by out-of-control government spending and other regulatory issues that drive up the cost of everything, these are the solutions that we get, is even more government. So I put some reasonable amendments across recently to try and move things the right direction and not have these outlandish spending ideas take hold. For example, my home state of California, you may have heard of our high-speed rail project that supposedly would link San Francisco to Los Angeles. Well, it sounds like a neat idea on paper when it was proposed and finally voted on by the voters to put $9 billion of bond money towards that back in 2008. Well, that's soon, for a $33 billion project, right? And so they voted for it. Actually, they delayed the election several times because they didn't want to vote in another bond in an atmosphere that might not have been perfect. So they chose 2008 and somehow it passed, 52 to 48%. So that $9 billion that was triggered by the voters saying, build a high-speed rail, you can't subsidize it, it has to carry its own weight. The price soon, when we figured it out 3 years later, tripled from $33 billion to $98.5. It's projected now to be about $105 billion. So I had a recent proposal to say, you know what, no more spending on this until we actually have a handle on a few important items. They're not even compensating the landowners in the valley so far for the land they're taking by eminent domain. It's in the right-of-way. They have all this money, it's such a great idea, and they aren't getting around to even paying the people whose land lies in the way of it. So what's that all about? As well, they're not doing the environmental stuff properly to see that the path is going to be properly handled as far as what might be environmentally sensitive in that area. And thirdly, they don't even have the whole route laid out. They don't know how they're going to get from south of Bakersfield through the Grapevine, over the Grapevine, around the Grapevine into LA. Are they going to build a $25 billion tunnel through there? It might be subject to seismic. Who knows? But they're still pursuing it anyway. It's received $3.5 billion of stimulus money from the Obama era of 2009 money, right? 2009 we're talking. And then they want to get another $2 billion from the so-called infrastructure bill that passed recently. So that's $5.5 billion of federal taxpayer money that all the 49 other states get to pay for this boondoggle that so far they can maybe lay their hands on $25 billion of projection for a project that's going to cost 105. So they're going to be searching for $80 billion more. They've already gotten 5 out of the federal government pretty much. $80 billion more. And the whole premise of high-speed rail was that private investors can't wait to come in and be part of this project to help build this fast train from LA to San Francisco. Well, the investors are staying away unless you make guarantees that they'll make money, and that's not even allowed in the original proposition that was passed by the voters, barely. So there really is no end here on this. They will continue to pursue federal money because they don't have it at the local level. We have to put a stop to that. That's why I ran that amendment. This, at a time when people need lower price fuel for their cars. That's all driven by policies that happen here in Washington, D.C., pretty much. You can't blame it all on Ukraine and Putin. Yeah, we imported maybe 7 or 8% of our oil. We could have made that up like this with known reserves we have here of energy we can produce in this country. We don't need Russian oil. We don't need Putin oil. We don't need foreign oil. We can do it here. We should be doing it. But Biden is making us pay the price with this incredible transition thing he's talking about, right? And it's just hurting the American people. Energy affects everything, the cost of everything, even the final bit where if you got it, a truck brought it. And so, and in the meantime, California, under a bill called AB 5, is putting owner-operator trucks out of business because they're not part of an employment. They don't belong to a union or what have you. And then in Washington, D.C., they want to emulate that bill called AB 5 under what's called the PRO Act and have it cost everybody in the whole country over that. So the ideas coming out of here are not helping the American people. It's very tone deaf here in Washington, D.C. and in the White House of what the American people are struggling with inflation and more profligate spending coming out of this place. So as I mentioned, the Army Corps of Engineers has been busy as a tool of the EPA, working on something called the Waters of the United States. They want to be in charge of every drop of water that hits the ground in the country. Even if it hits your roof and runs down your gutter, there's some jurisdictions that want to control that. So it's really pretty ominous, especially when you look at, my colleague before me that spoke about the wheat situation in Kansas, as well as they're having difficulty with their wheat crop down in Texas. Well, I have wheat growers up in the north part of my state, in the Klamath Basin, that if they could get just enough water, they could get a wheat crop. But they're taking the water away and flushing it down the Klamath River, ostensibly to help a fish population that it doesn't even work because they're trying to flush some disease, some virus out of it. It doesn't even work. And yet they keep doing it anyway. Kind of like with the Delta in California, flushing water out to save the Delta smelt. The Delta smelt population is basically extinct, and they still flush millions of acre feet of water out through that. And so California's agriculture is suffering. California's economy suffers. Those people that are productive are now unemployed, needing assistance instead of being part of the assistance. This is all government regulations come from DC and from California. It also affects low-cost energy, renewable energy, hydroelectric power. When they take that water away from the Klamath, when they take it away from Shasta Dam and run it out the ocean, that means your electricity prices go up. This all affects the economics of American families because of regulations, profligate spending here in Washington, D.C. So as we look at the world food situation, as my colleague from Kansas is talking about, if we're not getting a wheat crop out of the Midwest, if there's not enough to run a combine for, as he mentioned, we can't even run a combine up in Klamath Basin if they don't get the water for the wheat. Where are they going to run a combine to help us? Ukraine? They're dodging bombs right now. Russia has 27 million tons of wheat tied up that they're not letting out of the ports in Ukraine. Where are we supposed to get the food? Hungary's cutting off their exports of wheat. India's cutting off their exports of wheat. We can't grow it in this country. Where the hell are people supposed to get food? No one's going to come help us, are they? America's always the one helping everybody else. So we need water for ag. We need water. We need the money they're wasting on high-speed rail, $105 billion. That would produce, you could build 21 $5 billion dams for that and grow the food in California that so many people depend on. I'll have an update on that as well, as why California food is important, not just in California to growers and workers there, but to people in New York, people in Pennsylvania, people all through the Midwest. What we grow is important, not just for our local economy, but actually to keep things on the table that people need and demand. Instead, we would be importing them or not having them at all. So it all starts here in Washington, D.C. with misplaced priorities coming out of this administration that are not helping. I have to ask often to the Biden administration and even some of my colleagues in these two houses here, whose side are you on?